Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I am going to read Magic Treehouse number 12, Polar Bears Past Bedtime by Mary Pope Osborne, S5 5028, Chapter 1 through Chapter 5. Chapter 1. Are you serious? Whew! The strange sound came from outside the open window. Jack opened his eyes in the dark. The sound came again. Whoo! Jack sat up and turned on his light. He put on his glasses. Then he grabbed the flashlight from his table and shone it out the window. A white snowy owl was sitting on a tree branch. Whoo! The owl said again. Its large, yellow eyes looked right into Jack's. What does he want? Jack wondered. Is he a sign like the rabbit and the gazelle? A long-legged rabbit and a gazelle had led Jack and Annie to the magic tree house for their last two adventures. Wait a second, Jack said to the owl. I'll get Annie. Jack's sister Annie always seemed to know what birds and animals were saying. Jack jumped out of bed and hurried to Annie's room. She was sound asleep. Jack shook her up. They shook her and she stirred. What? She said. Come to my room, whispered Jack. I think Morgan sent another sign. In a split second, Annie was out of bed. She hurried with Jack to his room. Jack led her to the window. The snowy owl was still there. Whoo, said the owl. Then he raised his white wings and took off into the night. He wants us to go to the woods, said Annie. That's what I thought, said Jack. Meet you downstairs after we get dressed. No, he says go now, right now, said Annie. We'll have to wear our pajamas. I have to put on my sneakers, said Jack. Okay, I'll put on mine too. Meet you downstairs, said Annie. Jack pulled on his sneakers. He threw his notebook into his backpack. Then he grabbed his flashlight and tiptoed downstairs. Annie was waiting at the front door. They silently slipped outside together. The night air was warm. Moths danced around the porch light. I feel weird, said Jack. I'm going back to put on some real clothes. You can, said Annie. The owl said right now. She jumped off the porch and headed across the dark yard. Jack groaned. How did Annie know exactly what the owl said? He wondered. Still, he didn't want to be left behind. So he took off after her. The moon lit their way as they ran down the street. When they entered the Frog Creek woods, Jack turned on his flashlight. The beam of light showed shadows and swaying branches. Jack and Annie stepped between the trees. They stayed close together. Whoo! Jack jumped in fear. It's just a white owl, said Annie. He's somewhere nearby. The woods are creepy, said Jack. Yeah, said Annie. In the dark, it doesn't even feel like our woods. Suddenly, the owl flapped near them. Yikes, said Annie. Jack shone his flashlight on the white bird as it rose into the sky. The owl landed on a tree branch right next to the magic tree house. And there was Morgan Le Fay, the enchantress librarian. Her long white hair gleamed in the beam of Jack's flashlight. Hello, Morgan called softly in a soothing voice. Climb up. Jack used his flashlight to find a rope ladder. Then he and Annie climbed up into the treehouse. Morgan was holding 3 scrolls. Each one held the answer to an ancient riddle that Jack and Annie had already solved. You have journeyed to the ocean, the Wild West, and Africa to find the answers to these 3 riddles, said Morgan. Ready for another journey? Yeah, said Jack and Annie together. Morgan pulled the 4th scroll from the folds of her robe. She handed it to Annie. After we solve this riddle, will we become master librarians? Asked Annie. And help you get the books through time and space? Said Jack. Almost, said Jack. Before Jack could ask what she meant, Morgan pulled out a book and gave it to him. For your research, she said. Jack and Annie looked at the book's title, Adventure in the Arctic. Oh, wow, the Arctic, said Annie. The Arctic, said Jack. He turned to Morgan. Are you serious? Indeed, I am, she said. And you must hurry. I wish we could go there, said Annie, pointing at the cover. Wait a minute. We'll freeze to death, said Jack. Fear not, said Morgan. I'm sending someone to meet you. The wind started to blow. Meet us? Who? Said Jack. Who? Said the snowy owl. Before Morgan could answer, the tree owl started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still, absolutely still. Chapter 2. The Howling. The air was crisp and cold. Jack and Annie shivered. They looked out the window at a dark gray sky. The treehouse was underground. There were no trees and no houses, only an endless field of ice and snow. Morgan and the owl were gone. Read the riddle, said Annie, her teeth chattering. Jack unrolled the scroll. He read, I cover what's real and hide what's true. But sometimes I bring out the courage in you. What am I? I better write it down, said Jack, shivering. He pulled out his notebook and copied the riddle. Then he opened the book. He found the picture of a barren white field. He read aloud. The Arctic tundra is a treeless plain. During the dark winter, it is covered with snow and ice. In early spring, snow falls, but the sky begins to get lighter. During the summer season, the snow and ice melt and the sun shines 24 hours a day. It must be early spring now, said Jack. There's snow, but the sky is a little light. He turned the page. There was a picture of a man wearing a hooded coat with fur trim. Look at this guy, said Jack. He showed Annie the picture. We need his coat, said Annie. Yeah, said Jack. Listen to this. He read aloud. This seal hunter wears the sealskin clothing to protect him from icy winds. Before modern times, native people of the Arctic lived by hunting seals, caribou, polar bears, and whales. Jack took out his notebook. He wrote, The Arctic. Seal hunters wear seal skins. He was too cold to write any more. He clutched his pack against his chest and blew on his fingers. He wished he were back home in bed. Morgan said someone was coming to meet us, said Annie. If they don't come soon, we'll freeze to death, said Jack. It's getting darker and colder. Shh, listen, said Annie. A howling sound came from the distance. Then more howling sounds, and more. What's that? Said Jack. They looked out the window. Snow was falling now. It was hard to see. The howling grew louder. It was mixed with the yipping and yelping noises. Jack and Annie saw dark shapes coming through the snow. They seemed to be running toward the treehouse. Oops, said Annie. Great, that's all we need, said Jack. We are freezing and now a pack of oops is coming for us. Jack pulled Annie into the corner of the treehouse. They huddled close together. The howling got louder and louder. It sounded as if the wolves were circling the treehouse. They whined and yelped. Jack couldn't stand it any longer. He grabbed the Arctic book. Maybe this can help us, he said. He searched for a picture of a wolf. Oh, hi, Annie said. Jack looked up. He caught his breath. A man was looking through the treehouse window. His face was just surrounded by fur. It was the seal hunter from the Arctic book. Chapter 3. Mush. Did you come with the wolves? Asked Annie. Seal hunter looked puzzled. Did Morgan send you to us? Said Jack. I had a dream. The man said, you were in it. You needed help. Annie smiled. Morgan sends dreams sometimes, she said. We came in Morgan's treehouse. It flies through time. Oh, brother, thought Jack, who will believe that? The seal hunter smiled, as if he was not surprised at all. We do need help. We were freezing. The seal hunter nodded. Then he left the window. He returned a moment later with the two small parkas like his own. They were made of heavy dark skins with fur-trimmed hoods. He passed one to Jack and one to Annie. Thanks, said Jack and Annie. They put the parkas on. Hooray, said Annie. It's warm. Yeah, said Jack. They are made of seal skin. Poor seal, said Annie. Don't think about it, said Jack. He pulled his hood up. His head and upper body were very snug now. Only his legs, hands, and feet were still freezing. Oh, thanks, said Annie. Jack looked up. The seal hunter was giving Annie a pair of fur pants. Then he handed a pair to Jack. Thanks, said Jack. He quickly pulled the pants on over his pajama. Next, the seal hunter gave each of them a pair of fur boots and mittens. Jack took off his sneakers and pulled on the boots. He wiggled his frozen fingers into the warm mittens. I have a quick question, Jack said to the seal hunter. Do you know the answer to this riddle? He opened his notebook and read, I cover what's real and hide what's true. But sometimes I bring out the courage in you. What am I? Very puzzling and frustrating. The seal hunter shook his head. Come, he said to Jack and Annie. Then he disappeared from the window. What about those wolves out there? Jack called. But the seal hunter didn't answer. Jack grabbed the Arctic book and looked for a picture of the seal hunter. When Jack found the picture, he smiled. The seal hunter was standing beside a dog sled. Jack read, in cold weather, the seal hunter travels by dog sled. Siberian huskies often howl like wolves. A lead dog controls the others. The sled's runners are sometimes made of a frozen fish rolled up in sealskin. Hey, Annie, they are not wolves, said Jack. They are. He looked up. Annie was gone. They are dogs. Jack threw the book and notebook into his pack, but he was so fat in his furry clothes that the backpack wouldn't fit. Jack loosened the shoulder straps and tried to put the backpack on again. It fit. Jack looked at the small window. That would be a tight fit too. He went out, head first, and barely squeezed through. Jack fell onto the snowy ground. The snow was still drifting down. The air was misty white. Jack heard barking and howling. He moved carefully toward the noise. At first, he couldn't see the dog sled. But when he got closer, he counted 9 Siberian huskies. They had thick fur, big heads, and pointy ears. The lead dog barked at him. Jack stopped. He's telling you to climb on, said Annie. She was standing on the back of the sled. The seal hunter stood next to her in the snow. Jack jumped onto the sled next to Annie. The seal hunter cracked a long whip. Crack! Mush! Mush! He shouted. The huskies dashed off in a whirl of snow. Above them flew the snowy owl. Chapter 4. Snow House. The dog sled skimmed silently over the frozen tundra. The seal hunter ran alongside it. Sometimes he cracked his whip against the ice. The snowdrift looked like giant white sculptures as the sun slipped behind the frozen hill. Then a full orange moon rose in the sky. The moonlight lit a small rounded igloo in front of them. The dogs slowed, then stopped. Jack stepped off the sled and he went to help unhitch the dog. Jack took his book out and read about igloo. The word igloo means house in the language of native Arctic people. House is built with blocks of snow. Dry snow is good wall material because it keeps in the heat. The temperature inside an igloo can be 65 degrees warmer than the temperature outside. Jack took out his notebook. He pulled off his mitten just long enough to write. Igloo means house. Come on, Jack, said Annie. She and the seal hunter were waiting for him in front of the igloo. The dogs were leashed together outside. Jack hurried to join them. The hunter pushed aside animal skins covering the entrance. They stepped inside. A fat candle burned brightly. Shadows danced on walls of ice and snow. Jack and Annie sat on a fur-covered platform. They watched as the seal hunter moved about. First, he lit a small stove. Then he slipped outside. He came back with a snowball and chunks of frozen meat. He put the snowball in a pot over the stove. Then he added the meat. What's he making? Asked Annie. Jack pulled out his book and found a picture of the hunter cooking. He and Annie read the words silently. There was a time when nearly all of the Arctic people's food and clothing and tools came from Arctic animals, especially the seal. Nearly every part of the seal could be eaten. Lambs were fueled with seal fat. Clothing was made from seal skin, and knives and noodles were carved from seal bones. He must be boiling seal meat, said Jack. The poor seals, said Annie. The seal hunter looked up. They are not poor, said. They help us because they know we would die without them. Oh, said Annie. In return, we always thank the animal spirit, said the seal hunter. How do you do that? How do you do that? We have many special ceremonies, said the sea hunter. He reached under the fur cover of the platform and took out two wooden masks. Soon there will be a ceremony to honor the spirit of the polar bear. He said, I carved these masks for the ceremony. Polar bears? Said Annie. Yes, said the hunter. Just as the seal has given us many gifts, so has the polar bear. Like what? Said Jack. Long ago, the polar bear taught us how to live in the ice and snow, said the seal winter. Taught you? Said Jack. I mean, can you give us some facts? Seal hunter smiled. Yes, he said. A polar bear catches a seal when the seal comes up to breathe through a hole in the ice. All you seal hunters watched the polar bear and learned. This is how my father taught me to hunt seal, as his father taught him. That's a good fact, said Jack. The very first of my people learned to make igloo from polar bears, said the hunter. Polar bears build snow houses by digging caves in the drift. Another good fact. Uh-huh. Sometimes the polar bear can even teach people to fly, said the seal hunter. That's an amazing fact, said Annie. Jack smiled. The rest sounded like true fact. But I know, let's pretend. The hunter just laughed, then turned back to his cooking. That's why he wasn't surprised to hear about the treehouse, Jack thought. If he believed polar bears can fly, he probably would believe anything. The seal hunter lifted the chunks of a boiled seal out of his pot. He dropped them into a wooden bucket and gave it to Annie. Let's feed the dogs, he said. Oh boy, said Annie. She followed the hunter outside, swinging the bucket. Jack quickly threw his notebook and the Arctic book into his pack. He started to follow them. Then his gaze fell on the two bear masks. He picked them up to get a better look. Each was carved in the shape of a polar bear's face, with a blunt nose and roundish ears. There were two holes for eyes and a strap to hold it on your head. Suddenly, howls split the air. The dogs were barking and growling. Annie squealed. Are the dogs attacking her? Jack wondered. Annie, still holding the bear mask. Jack charged out of the glue. Chapter 5. You are it. The dogs were barking wildly at two small creatures, playing in the moonlight. Polar bear babies, cried Annie. One roly-poly cub leaped onto the other. Then they both rolled through the snow. Hi, little bears, Annie called. The cubs jumped up and shook themselves like wet puppies. Then they scampered toward Annie, who rushed to greet them. Hi, 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 she called. Wait, shouted Jack. Where's their mother? He looked around for the mother bear, but she was nowhere in sight. Maybe they are orphans, he thought. Jack looked back at Annie. She was wrestling with the little bears in the snow. She was laughing so hard she couldn't stand. Jack started laughing too. He carefully put the bear masks into his pack. Then he ran to join Annie. She was running with the cubs across the snowy tundra. One of them raced to her, tagged her, then raced away. Annie ran after the bear and tagged him back. You are it, she said. Jack and the other cub joined in. Soon Jack and Annie and the two cubs were all chasing each other over the moonlit snow. They ran until the two cubs fell down ahead of them. The cubs lay perfectly still. The panting Jack and Annie stared at them. Are they hurt? Annie wondered out loud. Jack and Annie ran to the cub. Just as they leaned down to see if they were all right, the cubs jumped up. They pushed Jack and Annie over and scampered away. They were pretending, said Jack. He laughed. Jack and Annie charged after the cubs. They ran over the white tundra until they came to the frozen sea. Jack looked around. We are pretty far from the igloo. I don't hear the huskies anymore, he said. Maybe we should go back in a minute, said Annie. Look, the bear cubs had scooted up a snowbank. They were on their backs, sliding down the bank onto the ice-covered sea. Jack and Annie laughed. It's like sledding, said Annie. Let's try it. Okay, said Jack, but then we have to go back. Jack followed Annie up the snowbank. He clutched his pack in his arm. Annie lay on her back. She whooped as she slid down the ice. Jack followed her. Watch out below, he shouted. The little bears were sitting at the bottom of the snowbank. One gently whacked Jack in the face with a furry paw. Then she lay down. I'm tired too, said Annie. Yeah, said Jack. Let's rest for just a minute. Jack and Annie looked up at the orange moon as they lay beside the cup. All they could hear was the wind and the soft breathing of the cup. That was fun, said Annie. It was, said Jack. But we better head back to the igloo. The seal hunters probably looking for us. Plus, we have to solve the riddle. Jack rolled onto his side and tried to stand. Crack! Uh-oh, he said. He went back down onto his knees. I think we're on thin ice. What do you mean? Said Annie. She started to stand. Another crack rang out. Uh-oh, she said. She carefully lay back down. The polar bear cubs moved closer to Jack and Annie. They made a little crying sound. Jack wanted to cry too, but he took a deep breath. Let's see what our book says, he said. He reached into his pack for the Arctic book. He took the masks out first and handed them to Annie. I took these from the igloo by mistake, he said. As he started to reach for his Arctic book, he heard the loudest crack of all. Crack! They're not even moving. And the ice is cracking, said Annie. Just then, there was a new sound, a low snorting sound. It came from the top of the snowbank, about 50 feet away. It just looked up. Staring down at them was a giant polar bear. The polar bear mother, whispered Annie. The end.